The Hudson Valley in late October is a study in russet and gold. The leaves were turning, painting the hills with the colors of a dying fire. It was beautiful, but as I steered my car up the long gravel driveway of Prentice Manor, I could only think about how much work it takes to preserve things that are fading away. I am Helena Voss. For 40 years, I worked in the quiet, climate-controlled basements of museums, restoring paintings that time had tried to destroy. I know the difference between a crack in the varnish and a crack in the canvas. I know that dirt is often just a protective layer waiting to be removed. And I know that people, like paintings, often hide their true nature under layers of accumulated grime. My husband, Richard, had died 3 weeks ago. We had been married late in life, a companionship built on a shared love of history and silence. But Richard's silence was gone now, replaced by the noise of settling an estate. And the loudest noise of all was his son, Jasper. I parked my car next to a red sports car that looked ridiculous against the backdrop of the Victorian Gothic mansion. Jasper Prentice. He was 45 years old, a man who owned an art gallery in the city that was always on the verge of being the next big thing, but mostly just sold overpriced prints to tourists. I walked up the stone steps. The front door was wide open. That was the first bad sign. Conservation requires control: temperature, humidity, light. An open door lets in the chaos of the world. Inside, the house smelled of lemon polish and panic. The grand foyer, usually a place of stillness, was cluttered with cardboard boxes. Furniture had been shoved against the walls, leaving scuff marks on the parquet floor. And there, in the center of the hall, was Jasper. He was wearing a linen suit that was already wrinkled, his sleeves rolled up to reveal a heavy gold watch. He was dragging a large, dust-covered object toward the door. "Jasper," I said, my voice echoing off the high ceiling. He jumped. He actually jumped, like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. He spun around, and a plastered-on smile appeared on his face. "Helena!" he exclaimed, breathless. "I didn't expect you until noon. I was just doing a little pre-sorting, trying to save you the heavy lifting." I walked closer, my heels clicking on the wood. I looked at the boxes. They were haphazardly taped. "The lawyers said nothing was to be moved until the inventory was complete, Jasper. That is the law." "Oh, come on, Helena," he scoffed, wiping sweat from his forehead. "It's just junk. Dad was a hoarder. You know that. I'm just clearing out the attic trash so the appraisers can focus on the real stuff. The silver, the library." He gestured to the object he had been dragging. It was a large rectangle, wrapped in a filthy gray dust sheet. It looked like a corpse wrapped in a shroud. "What is that?" I asked. "This?" He kicked it lightly with his Italian loafer. "Just some old frame. The canvas is rotted through. Smells like mildew. I was going to toss it in the dumpster out back before it stinks up the hallway." I looked at Jasper. I looked at his eyes. They were shifting, darting from me to the door. Jasper was a man who knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. If he thought something was trash, he usually ignored it. But he was exerting effort to move this. He was sweating. "Let me see it," I said. "Helena, really, it's filthy. You'll ruin your blouse." "I have spent my life cleaning bat guano off Renaissance statues, Jasper. I think I can handle a little dust. Let me see it." I didn't wait for his permission. I stepped forward and knelt on the floor. The smell hit me immediately. Acrid, dry dust, old wood, and something else. Linseed oil. Faint, but there. I pulled back the corner of the gray sheet. The frame was heavy, gilded plaster that had chipped away to reveal the red clay beneath. It was ugly, Victorian excess, but inside the frame was a canvas that was almost black with age. It looked like a window that hadn't been washed in a century. "See?" Jasper said, hovering over me. "It's black. Probably just some amateur landscape Dad bought at a flea market in the 70s. It's ruined." I ignored him. I took a pair of reading glasses from my pocket and slid them onto my nose. I leaned in, my face inches from the surface. To the untrained eye, it was just a dark smear. But I didn't look at the image. I looked at the texture. I looked at the brushwork. The paint was thick, impasto style. I tilted my head to catch the light from the open door. In the bottom right corner, beneath a layer of yellowed varnish and 80 years of coal dust, I saw a flicker of color. Blue. Not just any blue. It wasn't the flat chemical blue of modern acrylics. It was deep, vibrating, and luminous. It was cobalt blue mixed with a hint of white lead. It was the color of a summer sky seen through a garden trellis. My heart did a strange little flip in my chest. It was the physical sensation I always got when I was in the presence of something real. It is a vibration, a hum that comes off objects that have been touched by a master. "Where did you find this?" I asked, my voice calm, betraying nothing. "Behind the old wardrobe in the attic," Jasper said. "It was wedged in the crawl space. Seriously, Helena, let me toss it. The wood is probably full of termites." He reached down to grab the frame again. "No," I said. I placed my hand firmly on the canvas. Jasper froze. "No?" "We are not throwing this away," I said, standing up and dusting off my knees. "It goes into the inventory." Jasper laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. "Helena, be reasonable. The estate tax is going to be brutal enough. If we list every piece of garbage, the lawyers will bleed us dry with fees. I'm trying to help you maximize your share." "My share?" I looked at him. "Richard left me the house and its contents, Jasper. You got the gallery and the stocks. This painting, whatever it is, belongs to the house." His eyes narrowed. The charm slipped for a second, revealing the desperation underneath. "It's a piece of rot, Helena. Why are you being so difficult?" "Because I am a curator," I said, "and a curator never throws away a mystery until she has solved it." I bent down and lifted the painting. It was heavy, far heavier than a modern reproduction would be. The stretcher bars were solid oak. "Carry this to the library, please," I said. "I want to examine it under proper light." "I have to go," Jasper said abruptly. He checked his watch again. "I have a client meeting in the city." "Then I will carry it myself," I said, gripping the side of the frame. Jasper hesitated. He looked at the painting, then at me, then at the door. He looked like a man weighing his options. If he fought me for it, it would look suspicious. If he let me keep it, he risked me finding out what it was. But he clearly thought I was just a stubborn old woman who liked dusty things. He probably banked on me cleaning it up, realizing it was nothing, and forgetting about it. "Fine," he snapped. "Put it in the library. But don't blame me when you find out it's a velvet painting of a dog playing poker." He turned and marched out the door, his shoes crunching loudly on the gravel. He didn't say goodbye. He got into his red car and peeled out of the driveway, kicking up a cloud of dust. I watched him go. He was in a hurry. Why was he in such a hurry to throw away trash? I looked down at the painting in my hands. The dark, murky surface revealed nothing, but I knew what I had seen. That single stroke of blue. I hauled the painting into the library and propped it up on Richard's heavy mahogany desk. I closed the curtains to block the direct sunlight. I turned on the desk lamp. I ran my finger along the edge of the frame. It was packed with grime. I took a deep breath. Jasper thought this was garbage. He thought he was saving me the trouble. But Jasper didn't know that I had spent 40 years looking for things that other people had missed. I went to my bag and pulled out my kit. I didn't travel anywhere without it. A small UV flashlight, a magnifying loupe, and a bottle of mild solvent. I wasn't just going to inventory this painting. I was going to interrogate it. The next morning, Jasper returned. He did not come alone. I was in the kitchen making tea when I heard the car doors slam. I looked out the window to see Jasper walking up the path with a man I had never seen before. The stranger was short, wearing a tweed jacket that was trying too hard to look academic, and carrying a battered leather satchel. I met them in the foyer. "Helena," Jasper said, his voice bright and brittle. "I brought in a specialist. Since you were so concerned about that old canvas, I thought we should get a second opinion immediately. This is Mr. Finch. He's an appraiser for several estate auction houses in the city." Mr. Finch extended a hand. His grip was damp. "A pleasure, Mrs. Voss. Jasper tells me you found a curiosity." "I found a painting," I corrected. "Whether it is a curiosity remains to be seen." We walked into the library. The painting was where I had left it, propped on the desk, looking like a dark bruise against the rich mahogany of the room. Mr. Finch walked up to it. He didn't take out a magnifying loupe. He didn't ask for a flashlight. He stood with his hands in his pockets, rocked back on his heels, and let out a long, theatrical sigh. "Ah, yes," Finch said, nodding sagely. "I see these all the time. Late 19th century, likely a student copy of a darker romantic landscape, or perhaps just a parlor piece. See how the varnish has crackled? That's not age, that's cheap bitumen. It never dries properly. It creates that alligator skin effect." He was using the right words, but he was using them wrong. Bitumen does cause cracking, but this wasn't alligatoring. This was cracklure, the natural spiderweb fractures of old oil paint on a tensioned canvas. "It's worthless, then?" Jasper asked, leaning against the doorframe, checking his phone. "Decor value only," Finch declared. "Maybe $50 at a flea market? Honestly, the frame is worth more than the painting, and the frame is falling apart. It's what we call attic clutter, not worth the cost of restoration." Jasper looked at me with a triumphant sadness. "I'm sorry, Helena. I know you wanted it to be something special, but we have to be realistic. We can't catalog every piece of junk. It slows down the probate." He pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. "I have the inventory list here," Jasper said. "I've marked this as item 402, damaged decorative canvas, no value. If you just sign here, I can have Mr. Finch take it off our hands. He does clear-outs for estates. He can dispose of it properly." Dispose of it? That was the tell. You don't bring an appraiser to an estate just to haul away trash. You hire a junk crew for that. I looked at Finch. He was looking at the painting, but his eyes weren't bored. They were hungry. He was trying to hide it, but I saw the way his gaze kept snapping back to the bottom corner, the same place I had seen the blue. "I appreciate your time, Mr. Finch," I said, ignoring the paper Jasper was holding out. "But I think I will keep it." Jasper's smile faltered. "Helena, be reasonable. It's dirty. It smells. Why do you want to keep a piece of rotting canvas in Dad's library?" "Because I like the frame," I lied smoothly, "and I have plenty of free time. I think I'll try to clean it myself. A retirement project." "You don't have the chemicals," Jasper said quickly. "You'll ruin it." "Then I ruin it," I said, smiling sweetly. "As Mr. Finch said, it has no value. So there is no harm done, is there?" The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a palette knife. Jasper and Finch exchanged a look. It was a micro-expression, a quick flicker of frustration, and calculation. "Fine," Jasper snapped. "Keep the dust collector, but don't expect the estate to pay for your hobby supplies." He turned and stormed out, Finch scurrying after him like a obedient terrier. I waited until I heard the crunch of their tires fading down the driveway. Then I went to the front door and locked it. I engaged the deadbolt. I went to the library and locked that door too. I was alone. I walked over to the painting. "They are afraid of you?" I whispered to the canvas. "Let's find out why." I transformed the library into a triage unit. I laid plastic sheeting over Richard's desk. I brought in my travel kit of solvents, cotton swabs, and my high-intensity UV lamp. I pulled the heavy velvet drapes shut, plunging the room into darkness. I switched on the UV lamp. The purple light washed over the painting. To a layman, it looks like a magic trick. To a restorer, it is a diagnosis. Old varnish fluoresces a milky green under UV light. New retouching shows up as dark purple blobs. The painting glowed with a thick, uneven green haze. It was covered in layers of old, oxidized natural resin varnish. Dammer, or mastic. That was good. It meant the surface hadn't been touched in decades. It was a sealed time capsule, but it was under the green that I was interested. I turned on the desk lamp and put on my optivisor, the binocular magnifying lenses that made me look like a mad scientist. I mixed a mild solution of ethanol and rectified turpentine in a small glass jar. The smell filled the room, a sharp, medicinal scent that was the perfume of my entire career. I dipped a cotton swab into the solvent. I didn't start in the middle. You never start in the middle. I chose a small square on the far right edge, in what looked like a muddy shadow of a bush. I rolled the swab gently over the surface. The cotton turned brown immediately. Nicotine. Decades of cigar smoke. Richard smoked. His father smoked. The house had been a chimney for a century. I discarded the swab and took a fresh one. I rolled again. The brown gave way to a sickly yellow, the oxidized varnish. It was coming off easily, dissolving like sugar in hot water. And then, the window opened. Through the square inch of cleaned canvas, a color emerged. It wasn't the muddy brown of the surrounding area. It was green, but not just any green. It was viridian. I stopped. I leaned in closer, my nose almost touching the wet paint. Viridian is a chromium oxide pigment. It was vibrant, cool, and distinctive. But what mattered was the way it was applied. It wasn't flat. It was built up in short, energetic dashes. Tashes. I cleaned a little more, moving upward. The green gave way to the blue I had seen yesterday. I held my breath. I switched the UV light back on and looked at the blue pigment. Genuine lapis lazuli, ultramarine, has a specific crystalline sparkle. Synthetic ultramarine, invented in the 1820s, is flatter, more uniform. The pigment under my light wasn't just blue. It was deep, expensive, and complex. But it was the brushwork that made my hands shake. The strokes were rapid, wet on wet. The artist hadn't waited for the bottom layer to dry before adding the highlights. They had captured the light in a single moment. This wasn't a studio painting done over months. This was on plein air, outdoors. "Who are you?" I whispered. I cleaned a bit more, revealing a shape. It was the fold of a dress. A woman's dress, light and airy, catching the sunlight in a garden. The style was unmistakable. The feathery brushstrokes, the focus on light, the domestic intimacy of the scene. It looked like a Monet, but softer. It looked like a Renoir, but less sentimental. My mind raced through the catalog of missing works I had memorized in grad school. I grabbed a reference book from Richard's shelf. The Impressionists, 1874 to 1886. I flipped through the pages until I found the section on the female impressionists. There was a description of a lost painting by Berthe Morisot. Woman in the garden at Morecourt, listed as missing since the Second World War. I looked back at the canvas. The muddy mess was gone in my mind. I saw what was underneath. Jasper and Finch hadn't just found a nice antique. They had found a ghost. A painting worth arguably $20 million. And Jasper knew. That's why he was in a hurry. That's why he brought Finch. He wasn't going to sell this at auction. He couldn't. It was likely stolen property from the war, or undocumented. He was going to sell it on the black market to a private collector who didn't ask questions. He was going to sell his father's legacy for a briefcase of cash. I sat back in the leather chair, the dirty cotton swab still in my hand. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I wasn't just a widow anymore. I was the guardian of a masterpiece, and I was trapped in a house with a man who would do anything to get it back. I heard a noise outside, a car engine idling. I went to the window and peeked through the curtain. Jasper's red car was back. It was parked at the bottom of the driveway, the engine running, the lights off. He was watching the house. I looked at the lock on the library door. It was a flimsy, antique mechanism. It wouldn't hold anyone out for long. I needed to work faster. I needed to prove what it was, and then I needed to hide it. Because when Jasper realized I wasn't going to sign that paper, he wasn't going to ask nicely again. I stepped away from the window and let the heavy velvet curtain fall back into place. Jasper was out there, sitting in the dark, watching the house like a vulture waiting for the animal to stop breathing. I knew he wouldn't break in yet, not while the lights were on. Jasper was a coward who preferred the path of least resistance. He wanted me to sign the paper. He wanted me to give him the painting willingly so he could claim ignorance later when the police asked where the masterpiece went. I turned back to the room. The library was a cavern of shadows, illuminated only by the pool of light on the desk where the painting sat. I had cleaned a 2-inch square. It was a window into 1878. But a painting is not just paint and canvas. It is a document. It has a history, a life, a paper trail. In the art world, we call it provenance. Without provenance, a masterpiece is just a pretty picture. With provenance, it is a fortune. If Richard had this painting, there had to be a record. Richard never bought a pack of gum without keeping the receipt. I moved to the wall of filing cabinets in the corner. They were oak, towering, and stuffed with 50 years of correspondence. Jasper had already rifled through the obvious folders, the ones marked insurance, stocks, deeds. He had been looking for liquid assets. He wouldn't have looked in the sentimental files. I opened the drawer marked Travel, Europe. The smell of old paper wafted up, a dry, sweet scent of decaying cellulose. I flipped past the brochures for Italian villas and German spas until I found a thick manila envelope labeled Paris, 1950. That was the year Richard's father, a colonel in the logistics corps, had returned from post-war duty. He had brought back crates of souvenirs. I poured the contents onto the floor. Postcards, train tickets, menus from bistros that probably didn't exist anymore. And at the bottom, a thin, translucent sheet of carbon paper. An invoice. It was dated November 14th, 1950. The letterhead was faded but legible. Le Grenier des Oubliés, the attic of the forgotten. A second-hand shop in Montmartre. I ran my finger down the list of items. 1. Porcelain vase, chipped. 2. Box of silver spoons. 3. Oil painting, garden scene. Unsigned. Frame damaged. The price listed was 40 francs. My heart sank. Unsigned. That explained why it had sat in the attic for 70 years. Richard's father had bought it as furniture. He hadn't known. The dealer hadn't known. It was one of thousands of orphaned objects shuffling around Europe after the war, lost in the chaos. But then I looked closer at the invoice. Scribbled in the margin, in a different pen, were numbers. Lot 744B. I froze. 744B. That wasn't a shop inventory number. That was the cataloging format used by the ERR, the Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, the Nazi agency tasked with looting art from Jewish collections in France. The painting wasn't just lost, it was stolen. It had been looted, processed, and then lost again in the confusion of the liberation, ending up in a junk shop before Richard's father bought it for pennies. This changed everything. It meant the painting wasn't just valuable. It was radioactive. If I tried to sell it legally, it would be seized and returned to the heirs of the original owners. But if Jasper sold it on the black market doesn't care about the ERR. They don't care about justice or restitution. They only care about the object. Jasper could sell this to a private collector in Dubai or Singapore for $10 million, and it would disappear into a climate-controlled vault forever. The history would be erased. The crime would be completed. Suddenly, the front door chime echoed through the house. I jumped, shoving the invoice into my pocket. I hadn't heard the car move. He must have walked up the driveway. I took a breath, smoothed my skirt, and walked to the foyer. I checked the peephole. It was Jasper. He was holding a white paper bag and smiling that dazzling, empty smile. I opened the door. "It's late, Jasper." I know, he said, stepping inside before I could block him. He brought the smell of cold night air and takeout food with him. I saw the lights were still on. I felt bad about how we left things earlier. I brought peace offerings. Thai food from that place in town you like. He held up the bag. He was trying to charm me. The good son routine. "I've already eaten," I lied. "Well, I haven't," he said, walking past me toward the kitchen. "Come on, keep me company. It's spooky in this big house alone." I followed him. I had to play the game. If he suspected I knew what the painting was, he might stop pretending and start taking. We sat at the kitchen island. He unpacked cartons of pad thai and spring rolls. He ate hungrily, his eyes scanning the room, checking the exits, checking my face. "So," he said between bites, "did you have fun with your project? The dusty old canvas?" "I cleaned a corner," I said, keeping my voice indifferent. "It's quite damaged. The varnish is very dark." "Told you," he said, pointing a chopstick at me. "Waste of time, but hey, if it keeps you busy." He took a sip of water. "Listen, Helena, I spoke to Mr. Finch again. He's doing a run to the city tomorrow afternoon with a large truck. He said since he's already in the area, he could swing by and pick up the junk items, the broken chairs, the old rugs, and that painting." "Tomorrow?" I asked. "That's very fast." "Efficiency is key in these things," Jasper said, leaning forward. "The sooner we clear the clutter, the sooner we can inventory the real assets. The silver, the jewelry. That's what matters to you, right?" "I suppose," I said. "So, I have the release form here again," he said, reaching into his jacket. "If you just sign it now, I can give it to Finch in the morning. You won't even have to be here. You can go into town, get a coffee, relax. We'll handle the heavy lifting." He placed the paper on the granite counter. He clicked a gold pen and set it down next to the signature line. "Tomorrow afternoon," I repeated. "Around 2, he said. "He has a buyer, a disposal facility, that closes at 5. He slipped. "A buyer?" I asked, looking him dead in the eye. "For trash?" Jasper didn't blink, but his jaw tightened. A bulk buyer. For scrap wood and canvas. Recyclers. They pay by the pound. It's practically nothing, but it covers the gas money. He was lying. You don't recycle Victorian oil paintings. I see, I said. I picked up the pen. Jasper held his breath. I could see the pulse jumping in his neck. He was so close. He thought he had won. I twirled the pen in my fingers. I think I'll wait. Jasper's face darkened. Wait for what? I want to finish cleaning it, I said. I'm enjoying the process. It reminds me of my work. Tell Mr. Finch he can pick up the chairs, but the painting stays. I set the pen down. Jasper stared at me. The charm evaporated. For a second, I saw the real Jasper. The man with gambling debts. The man with a failing gallery. The man who was drowning and saw me as the weight dragging him down. You're making a mistake, Helena, he said softly. You're holding on to garbage. One man's trash is another man's treasure, I said. He stood up abruptly. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. Fine, have it your way. Play with your toys. But don't come crying to me when the appraisal comes in low because you wasted time on nonsense. He didn't finish his food. He marched to the door. I'll be back tomorrow at 2 to oversee the furniture removal. Have the painting ready, Helena. I don't want to argue about this again. He slammed the front door. I locked it instantly. I ran to the window. I watched him walk down the driveway to his car. He didn't drive away immediately. He sat there for 5 minutes, making a phone call. I could see the glow of the screen illuminating his angry face. He wasn't calling a recycler. He was calling his buyer. He was telling them there was a delay. He was telling them the old woman was being difficult. I looked at the clock. It was 9:00 p.m. He said he would be back at 2:00 p.m. tomorrow. That gave me 17 hours. 17 hours to prove exactly what this painting was, secure it, and find a way to stop him from taking it by force. Because tomorrow, he wasn't going to ask for a signature. He was going to take it. I went back to the library. I took the invoice out of my pocket and placed it next to the painting. The numbers matched. The history was real. I had the provenance. I had the underpainting. Now I needed to see the face. I needed to see the girl in the blue garden. I picked up my solvent bottle. I was going to work all night. The house settled into the deep silence of 3 a.m. It was a silence I knew well. For 40 years, my life had been measured in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, when the phone didn't ring and the world stopped demanding things. This was the time when the art spoke back. I had turned the library into a sanctuary. The curtains were drawn tight. The only light came from my high-intensity articulated desk lamp, which cast a surgical white circle onto the canvas. The air was thick with the smell of acetone and ethanol. To most people, it smells like a nail salon or a hospital, but to me it smells like resurrection. I was working on the lower left quadrant now. This was the most delicate part of the operation. The varnish here was thick and syrupy, applied by someone 60 years ago who clearly didn't know what they were doing. It had oxidized into a hard amber shell, trapping the image underneath like a fly in dirt. I dipped my cotton swab into the solution. I touched it to the surface. I counted to 3. 1, 2, 3. I rolled the swab, gently lifting it away. The cotton came away stained a sickly tobacco yellow. But on the canvas, a window opened. The murky brown shadow dissolved. In its place, a patch of vibrant living green emerged. It was the grass of a summer garden in 19th century France. And standing in the grass was a shoe, a delicate white slipper barely peeking out from under the hem of a dress. I changed swabs. My hands found a rhythm. Dip, roll, lift, dip, roll, lift. It was hypnotic. It was a form of prayer. With every stroke, I was erasing the neglect. With every stroke, I was bringing her back to life. Slowly, the figure emerged. She wasn't posing stiffly like a studio model. She was caught in a moment of motion. She was turning, looking back over her shoulder, her hair caught in a breeze that had blown through a garden in 1878. Her face was a blur of soft pinks and creams rendered with strokes so fast and confident they looked like abstract slashes until you stepped back and they coalesced into a human soul. It was breathtaking. It was the kind of beauty that makes your chest ache. I moved to the bottom corner where the grass met the frame. This was where the artist would have signed it. But Impressionists were tricky. Sometimes they signed in wet paint, sometimes they scratched it in with the back of the brush, and sometimes they hid it in the foliage. I switched to a smaller swab. I worked in millimeters. The yellow haze lifted, and there it was, painted in a dark violet, almost lost in the shadows of the leaves. B. Morisot. I set the swab down. My hand was trembling. I took a sip of cold tea just to feel something real in my throat. It was confirmed. This wasn't just a painting. This was the missing woman in the garden. It was a piece of history that had survived the Nazis, the war, the looting, and the damp attic of an American hoarder. It was a survivor. And tomorrow, at 2 o'clock, Jasper Prentice was going to sell it for scrap value to a fence who would bury it in a private vault forever. I looked at the girl in the painting. She looked fragile, but she had survived a war. I felt a sudden, fierce, protective instinct. I wasn't just an old woman in a library. I was her guardian. Suddenly, the desk lamp flickered. I looked up. The bulb buzzed once, twice, and then died. Total darkness. I sat perfectly still. It wasn't a burnt-out bulb. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen down the hall had stopped. The electric clock on the wall had stopped ticking. The power had been cut. I didn't panic. Panic is for people who don't know their environment. I sat in the pitch black listening. The Prentice Manor was old. The fuse box was in the basement, but there was a main breaker on the outside of the house near the garage. To cut the power, someone had to be physically outside, pulling the lever. Jasper. He wasn't waiting for tomorrow. He was trying to flush me out. He knew I was working. He knew I wouldn't leave the painting. He wanted to scare me. He wanted the old woman to get frightened of the dark and run out the front door so he could slip in and take what he wanted. Or worse, he was coming in now under the cover of darkness. I heard the creak of a floorboard in the foyer. He was already inside. He must have had a key. Of course he had a key. He grew up here. I stood up slowly. I didn't turn on my flashlight. That would just give away my position. I knew this library. I knew that the rug curled slightly at the corner near the door. I knew the leather chair squeaked if you put weight on the left arm. I moved silently around the desk. I reached for the painting. It was heavy, but adrenaline makes things lighter. I lifted it off the easel. I couldn't leave it here. If he had a flashlight, he would find it in seconds. I needed to hide it. But where? The library was open space. The filing cabinets were too small. I remembered the fireplace. It was a massive, cavernous thing big enough to roast a pig. We never used it because the flue was blocked. The front was covered by a heavy, decorative brass screen. I crept across the room, guiding myself by the edge of the rug. I could hear footsteps in the hallway now. Slow, deliberate steps. He wasn't rushing. He was enjoying this. He was the hunter stalking the prey. I reached the fireplace. I moved the screen aside. It clinked softly against the stone hearth. I froze. The footsteps stopped. "Helena?" Jasper's voice floated through the darkness. It was mocking. "Is the power out? That old wiring is so unreliable. Do you need help?" He was playing games. I slid the painting into the cold firebox, leaning it against the back wall of soot-stained brick. It was a terrible place for a masterpiece, but it was the only blind spot in the room. I replaced the brass screen. I moved away from the fireplace, backing into the corner behind the heavy velvet drapes. The library door creaked open. A beam of light cut through the room. It was blindingly bright. Jasper had a tactical flashlight. The beam swept over the desk. It hit the easel. Empty. "Helena?" His voice lost the mocking edge. It became sharp. "Where are you?" The beam swept the room wildly now. It hit the filing cabinets. It hit the bookshelves. It hit the leather chairs. He walked into the room. I could hear his breathing. It was fast and shallow. He was angry. He went to the desk. He saw the solvents. He saw the cotton swabs stained with yellow and blue paint. He picked one up. "You cleaned it," he whispered. "You crazy old witch. You cleaned it." He knew. He saw the blue on the cotton. He knew I had found something. He spun around, shining the light into the corners. "I know you're in here, Helena. Come out. Give me the painting. Don't make this ugly. You're an old woman. You can't stop me." I pressed myself against the cold glass of the window behind the curtain. My hand found the heavy iron sash weight of the curtain cord. It wasn't a weapon, but it was heavy. He was 5 feet away from me. If he checked behind the curtains, he would find me, and he would find the fireplace. I needed a distraction. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I had put it on silent, but the screen was bright. I slid it across the floor under the curtain so it skittered across the parquet toward the hallway door. Clack, clack, clack. Jasper spun around toward the noise. "Who's there?" He ran toward the door, shining the light into the hallway. While his back was turned, I slipped out from behind the curtain. I didn't run for the door. I ran for the secret panel in the wainscoting. Richard had shown it to me once, a liquor cabinet built into the wall during Prohibition. It was narrow, barely wide enough for a person, but it connected to the servants' passage that led to the kitchen. I pressed the molding. The panel clicked open. I squeezed inside and pulled it shut just as Jasper turned back. "Helena!" he screamed. He sounded unhinged. He started overturning furniture. I heard a lamp crash to the floor. I was in the walls now. I was in the dark. But I was safe for the moment. And the painting was safe behind the brass screen. But the game had changed. He wasn't pretending anymore. He knew that I knew. And tomorrow wasn't going to be a negotiation. It was going to be a robbery. I made my way through the narrow, dusty passage toward the kitchen. I needed a weapon, and I needed a plan. Jasper thought he was dealing with a frail stepmother. He forgot that I spent my life fighting time itself, and I usually won. I waited in the dark, pressed against the cold plaster of the servants' passage, listening to the sounds of a man tearing apart his childhood home. Jasper was in the library, throwing books off shelves and overturning chairs. He was screaming my name, a raw, jagged sound that had nothing to do with family and everything to do with greed. Then, silence. The rampage stopped. I heard his heavy footsteps moving out of the library, across the parquet floor of the foyer, and out the front door. He was going to the breaker box. He probably realized that hunting a woman in a pitch-black mansion wasn't as easy as he thought. Or maybe he just wanted the lights back on so he could find where I had hidden the prize. I didn't hesitate. As soon as the front door slammed, I slipped back out of the secret panel and into the library. My eyes had adjusted to the gloom. I moved straight to the fireplace and pulled the brass screen aside. The painting was there, cool to the touch, safe in its soot-stained hiding place. I picked it up. It was heavy with history. I couldn't leave it here, but I couldn't leave the room empty either. If Jasper came back and found the easel bare, he would keep tearing the house apart until he found the moriceau. And eventually, he would find it. I needed a decoy. I ran to the stack of rejected art that Jasper had piled by the door earlier that day. Most of it was mass-produced Victorian landscape art. Dark, brooding scenes of stags and gloomy mountains that Richard's father had bought by the yard. I grabbed one that was roughly the same size as the moriceau. The frame was different, less ornate, but in the dim light, it was close enough. I hauled it to the desk and propped it up on the easel. I looked at it. It was a terrible painting of a Scottish Highland cow. It looked nothing like the woman in the garden. But Jasper didn't know what the woman in the garden looked like. He had only seen two things: a filthy black canvas and a small, cleaned square of vibrant blue pigment in the corner. I had about 3 minutes before the lights came back on. I opened my travel kit. I grabbed my palette and a tube of cobalt blue restoration acrylic. It wasn't oil, but it dried fast. I squeezed a blob onto the palette. I mixed it with a little white to match the luminosity of the moriceau. I took a brush and attacked the bottom corner of the Highland cow painting. I painted over the cow's hoof with a patch of brilliant blue. Then I grabbed a handful of dust from the fireplace mantel, literal soot and grime, and blew it onto the wet paint to age it instantly. I took a rag and smeared the rest of the canvas with a mixture of beeswax and charcoal dust to darken it, to make it look as filthy and neglected as the moriceau had been. It was a crude forgery, a theatrical prop. But under the yellow light of a desk lamp, to a man blinded by greed, it might just pass. I took the real moriceau, the masterpiece worth $20 million, and ran to the window seat. The seat lifted up to reveal a storage chest for blankets. I shoved the painting inside, under a pile of moth-eaten wool throws. I closed the lid and sat on the cushion. Just as I smoothed my skirt, the overhead chandelier flickered and blazed to life. The sudden light was blinding. I blinked, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The front door opened. Jasper walked in. He looked disheveled. His hair was wild, his tie loosened. He marched into the library, his eyes scanning the room. He saw the overturned chair. He saw the mess he had made, and then he saw me. I was sitting calmly in the window seat, a book in my lap, which I had grabbed blindly from a shelf. "Helena?" he breathed. He looked confused. "I thought I couldn't find you." "I was here the whole time, Jasper," I said, my voice steady. When the lights went out, I sat down to wait. It's dangerous to walk around an old house in the dark. He looked at the desk. He saw the painting on the easel, the dark, grimy canvas with the patch of bright blue in the corner. He let out a breath he must have been holding for 10 minutes. His shoulders dropped. He walked over to the easel and touched the frame. "Right," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Right, the fuse must have blown. Old wiring. I should have warned you." He was gaslighting me again, pretending he hadn't just been hunting me, pretending he hadn't cut the power. "It was quite frightening," I said. "I heard noises. Someone running." "Just me," he said quickly. Checking the breakers, rushing to get the lights back on for you. He leaned in and looked at the blue patch on the decoy painting. He stared at it hungrily. You really are working hard on this thing, he murmured. Is that the spot you cleaned? Yes, I said. It's stubborn, but the color is interesting, isn't it? Very interesting, he said. He turned to me, and the mask of the charming stepson slid back into place, though it was crooked now. Look, Helena, it's late. You're exhausted. I'm exhausted. Let's stop this game. What game? The I'm going to save the art game, he said. Mr. Finch is coming tomorrow at 2. I want this piece ready for him. I don't want you touching it anymore. You might damage it. He meant devalue it. He didn't want me uncovering the signature. He didn't want me figuring out what he thought I hadn't figured out yet. I suppose you're right, I said, feigning defeat. I stood up and walked over to the easel. I picked up a rag and wiped my hands. My eyes are tired. The dust is giving me a headache. Jasper watched me like a hawk. So you'll leave it? I'll leave it, I said. I'm going to bed. You can lock up. I walked past him. He smelled of sweat and expensive cologne that had gone sour. Good night, Helena, he said. He didn't move. He stayed by the easel, guarding the fake painting. I walked up the grand staircase, my back burning. I knew exactly what he was going to do. He wasn't going to wait for Mr. Finch at 2:00 p.m. He was going to take it tonight. He was going to steal the decoy, load it into his car, and drive off into the night, thinking he had just secured his fortune. I went into my bedroom and locked the door, but I didn't go to sleep. I waited 10 minutes. Then I went to the window that overlooked the driveway. I watched Jasper carry the painting out of the house. He had wrapped it in the dust sheet again. He handled it with reverence now, placing it gently in the trunk of his red sports car. He looked around the dark grounds, checking for witnesses. He got into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life. He sped down the driveway, taillights disappearing into the trees. He was gone, and he had taken a worthless painting of a Scottish cow with a blue hoof. I let out a laugh that was half sob. I had won the battle, but the war wasn't over. Jasper wasn't stupid. He would take that painting to his buyer. The buyer would be an expert. They would put it under a light. They would clean off my clumsy restoration. They would see the cow. And then Jasper would come back. And he wouldn't be charming. He wouldn't be bringing Thai food. He would be coming back for blood. I looked at the clock. It was 4 a.m. I had bought myself a few hours, maybe half a day. I needed to get the real Morisot out of the house. I needed to get it to a secure location. But as I turned away from the window, a thought struck me, a darker, more dangerous thought. If I simply saved the painting, Jasper would just deny everything. He would say it was a misunderstanding. He would claim he took the wrong canvas by mistake. He would walk away scot-free and probably try to loot the rest of the estate later. To stop a man like Jasper, you don't just have to save the asset. You have to let him destroy himself. I needed him to sell a fake, but not the obvious fake he just took. That was too easy. He would figure that out too soon. I needed him to sell a perfect fake. A fake that would fool him, fool his buyer, and only reveal itself when the money had already changed hands. I went back downstairs to the library. I retrieved the Morisot from the window seat. I put it back on the easel. I had to prepare for his return. When he came back, furious and empty-handed, I had to be ready to offer him exactly what he wanted, with a poison pill inside. I reached for my chemical kit. I was going to use a trick I learned from a forger in Italy back in the 80s. A reactive varnish. Invisible to the eye, but opaque under a specific wavelength of light. If Jasper wanted a masterpiece, I was going to give him one that would vanish before his eyes. I did not sleep. Sleep is for people who can afford to lose time. I had 3 hours before sunrise, and I had to forge a masterpiece. I went to the attic, the same crawl space where Jasper had found the original. I pulled out another canvas from Richard's junk pile. It was a pastoral scene of sheep grazing in a valley, painted by some anonymous amateur in the 1920s. The composition was terrible, but the canvas was old, and the stretcher bars were the right era. I brought it down to the library. I placed it on the table next to the real Morisot, which I had retrieved from the window seat. I am not a forger by trade, but every restorer is a forger at heart. We have to be. When a flake of paint falls off a Rembrandt, we have to mix the exact pigment, the exact binder, and apply it with the exact brushstroke to fill the void. We are mimics. I squeezed cobalt blue, viridian, and flake white onto my palette. I worked fast. I didn't need to paint the whole woman. I just needed to paint what Jasper had seen. The blue dress, the turn of the shoulder, the suggestion of light. I painted over the sheep. I turned a woolly back into the silk fold of a gown. I turned a green hill into a garden hedge. It was loose, impressionistic. It was a sketch, a ghost of the real thing. To a museum curator, it would look like a clumsy copy. But Jasper wasn't a curator, and his buyer, meeting him in a dark parking lot or a dimly lit room, wouldn't have time for a chemical analysis. But the paint was fresh. That was the problem. Fresh oil paint smells. It stays soft for months. I reached into my chemistry kit. I pulled out a bottle of cicative, a drying agent. I mixed it into the paint in a dangerous quantity. It would make the paint dry to the touch in an hour, but it would eventually cause the paint to crack and darken within a year. It was a death sentence for the painting, but this painting was born to die. Then, the coup de grace. I took a small jar of a photoreactive varnish I had developed for a specific exhibit on special effects in cinema. It contained a suspended particulate that was transparent in visible light, but reacted violently to high-intensity ultraviolet radiation. Professional art buyers always carry a UV flashlight. It's the first tool they use to check for repairs. Old varnish glows green. New paint looks black. But my mixture? Under a UV beam, it wouldn't just glow. It would turn opaque. A milky, solid white fog that would obscure the image entirely. It was a security tag, a chemical dye pack for art. I coated the fake Morisot with the varnish. I set it in front of a fan to dry. Then, I took the real Morisot, the woman in the garden, and wrapped it in acid-free tissue paper. I placed it inside a flat cardboard box marked R. Voss, Tax Documents 1998. I taped it shut. I carried the box to the garage and slid it onto the shelf behind a stack of old tires. It was the last place Jasper would look. I returned to the library. I put the fresh forgery on the easel. I dabbed a little dirt on the frame. I sat down in the leather chair. I folded my hands, and I waited. He came back at 7:15 a.m. I heard the red car scream up the driveway. I heard the door slam. I heard the front door crash open, the lock splintering under the force of his kick. Jasper didn't walk into the library. He exploded into it. He was carrying the cow painting in one hand. His face was a mask of purple rage. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, who had driven to the city and back, fueling himself on caffeine and panic. He threw the cow painting at me. It struck the desk, knocking over a cup of pencils. "You think this is funny?" he screamed. His voice cracked. "You think you're clever? A cow? A bloody cow?" He marched around the desk. I stayed seated. I didn't flinch. "Where is it, Helena?" he hissed, leaning down into my face. He smelled of sweat and fear. "I have a buyer waiting, a very dangerous man who doesn't like having his time wasted." I showed him a picture of a cow. Do you know what he told me? He told me I had 24 hours to produce the moriceau, or I would lose more than my gallery. He grabbed the arms of my chair. "Where is the painting?" I let my lip tremble. I made my eyes go wide and wet. I channeled every fragile, confused old lady I had ever met. I was scared, Jasper," I whispered. "I saw you in the garden last night. I knew you were going to take it. I just wanted to protect it." "Protect it?" he spat. "You stole it!" "I swapped them," I confessed, pointing a shaking finger at the easel behind him. "The real one is right there. I finished cleaning it last night." Jasper spun around. The forgery sat on the easel, bathed in the morning light filtering through the sheer curtains. The drying agent had worked. The surface was matte, the colors vibrant. The blue dress popped against the green background. It looked exactly like the glimpse he had seen 2 days ago. He walked toward it slowly, like he was approaching a bomb. He reached out and touched the corner. It was dry. He leaned in, examining the signature I had carefully forged in the foliage. B. Morisot. "This is it," he muttered. The rage drained out of him, replaced by a greedy, desperate relief. "This is the one." He turned back to me. "Why did you swap them? Why play games?" "I wanted to negotiate," I said softly. "I wanted you to promise me you won't sell the house." It was a weak demand, the kind a sentimental widow would make. It made sense to him. Jasper laughed. It was a cruel, barking sound. "The house? Helena, after this sells, I'll buy you 10 houses, or I'll put you in the best nursing home money can buy, which is where you belong." He grabbed the dust sheet from the floor, the same one he had used for the cow, and threw it over the easel. He lifted the painting. "Don't touch anything else," he ordered. "I'm taking this, and if you call the police, if you call anyone, I will tell them you are the one who looted it. I'll tell them you've been hiding Nazi art for 40 years. Who do you think they'll believe? The crazy old woman with the chemical fumes in her library, or the reputable gallery owner?" He didn't wait for an answer. He tucked the painting under his arm and ran. I listened to his footsteps retreat down the hall. I heard the car start. I heard him tear down the driveway, spraying gravel. I stood up. I walked to the window and watched the red speck disappear into the trees. "Reputable," I whispered to the empty room. I looked at the cow painting lying on the floor. The poor thing had been through a lot. I picked it up and set it on the desk. Then I picked up the phone. I didn't call the police. Not yet. The police require evidence, and right now, all I had was a missing forgery and a broken door. I called the number I had found in Richard's Rolodex under security. It was the private number for the county sheriff, a man named Miller who used to go fishing with Richard. "Sheriff Miller?" I said when he answered. "This is Helena Voss." "Yes, Richard's wife. I'm afraid I have a trespasser situation." "No, not currently, but he threatened to return tonight. He's meeting someone. A transaction." "Yes, I believe it involves stolen property. In the driveway. Tonight at 10. I gave him the details. I hung up. Jasper thought he had the leverage. He thought he had the asset. But he was driving down the highway with a bomb in his trunk. and he was bringing it straight to a man who would likely detonate it for him. I went to the garage and retrieved the box marked tax documents. I brought the real Morceau back to the library. I had one more thing to do. I had to prepare the stage for the final act. I cleaned up the spilled pencils. I put the solvents away. Tonight, Jasper would try to sell a lie, and I would be there to watch the truth come out under the cold, unforgiving light of a UV beam. The moon was hidden behind a thick bank of clouds, leaving the driveway of Prentice Manor in total darkness. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating dark that swallows sound. I sat in the front seat of my sedan, which I had moved to the service road behind the hedges. I had a clear line of sight to the gravel circle in front of the house, but I was invisible to anyone standing there. I checked my watch. 9:58. Jasper was already there. He was pacing back and forth in front of the porch steps. The red tail lights of his car cast long demonic shadows against the stone facade of the house. He was holding the painting. It was wrapped in the gray dust sheet leaning against his leg. He looked like a nervous sentry guarding a crumbling castle. He checked his phone every 30 seconds. The glow illuminated his face. He was sweating despite the chill in the air. He was terrified. He was about to sell a stolen masterpiece for cash to a criminal organization. If this went wrong, he wouldn't just be sued. He would be erased. At 10 o'clock exactly, headlights cut through the trees at the bottom of the drive. A black SUV moved silently up the gravel. It was a massive vehicle with tinted windows, the kind used by government officials and high-level fixers. It stopped 10 feet away from Jasper. The engine purred a low, menacing rumble. The back door opened. A man stepped out. He was not what I expected. I expected a thug in a leather jacket. This man was dressed in a tailored wool coat and wore rimless glasses. He looked like a university professor or a very expensive accountant. He carried a silver aluminum briefcase. Jasper stepped forward, his hand trembling as he gripped the painting. "You must be Mr. K," Jasper said, his voice too loud in the quiet night. The man didn't smile. He didn't offer a hand. He simply nodded at the painting. "Show me." Jasper fumbled with the dust sheet. He pulled it away, revealing the forgery. Even from my hiding spot, I could see the flash of blue in the headlights. The chemical varnish I had applied gave the surface a glossy, wet look that mimicked fresh oil paint perfectly. The man stepped closer. He leaned in, examining the brushwork without touching it. He hummed a low note of appreciation. "The Morceau," the man said softly. "We thought it was lost in the fires of 44. Your father was a clever man, Mr. Prentice, keeping it hidden all these years. He didn't know he was looking at a painting of a sheep that I had vandalized 4 hours ago. He saw what he wanted to see. Greed is the ultimate filter." "The money?" Jasper asked, his eyes darting to the briefcase. The man set the briefcase on the hood of Jasper's red car. He clicked the latches open. Inside, stacks of $100 bills were arranged in neat rows. $2 million in cash. "A down payment," the man said, with the rest to be wired upon delivery to Zurich. Jasper reached for the money. "Ah," the man said, snapping the case shut. "Not yet. Standard procedure. Verification." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a flashlight. My breath hitched in my throat. This was it. The moment of truth. The man clicked the light on. It wasn't a normal white beam. It was a high-intensity UV lamp, a purple cone of light aimed directly at the canvas. Jasper smiled confidently. He expected the painting to glow with the green haze of old varnish proving its age. He expected the signature to pop. The man swept the light over the blue dress. At first, nothing happened. Then the chemistry kicked in. The photoreactive particles in the varnish I had synthesized responded to the ultraviolet radiation. They didn't glow. They bonded. A milky white cloud began to bloom on the surface of the painting. It spread rapidly like frost across a window pane. The blue dress vanished. The green garden vanished. The signature vanished. Within 5 seconds, the entire image was gone. The canvas was just a rectangle of opaque white fog. The man froze. He clicked the light off. The white fog remained. He clicked it back on. The fog grew denser. "What is this?" the man asked, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more threat than a scream. Jasper stared at the painting. His mouth fell open. He rubbed his eyes. "No, wait. It's just the humidity. It was fine this morning." He reached out and wiped the canvas with his sleeve. The white haze didn't wipe off. It was chemically bonded to the paint. "You are trying to sell me a blank canvas, Mr. Prentice?" the man asked. He took a step back, his hand moving inside his coat. "No!" Jasper screamed. "It's the Morisot! She cleaned it! Helena cleaned it! It must be the solvent!" Jasper looked frantic. He grabbed the painting, shaking it as if that would make the image come back. Look at the texture! It's real!" The man signaled to the driver of the SUV. The driver got out. He was a mountain of a man with a thick neck and very large hands. "We do not like games," the man said, adjusting his glasses. "You brought us here. You wasted our time, and you tried to pass off this." He gestured to the white square. "I swear." Jasper was backing away now, backing toward the porch steps. "I didn't know. The old woman. She did something. She switched it." Jasper turned and pointed at the house. "She's in there. She has the real one. Let me go get it." The driver moved to intercept him, blocking the path to the front door. The man with the glasses picked up the briefcase of money. He looked at Jasper with cold, dead eyes. "The deal is terminated. And consider your gallery's credit expired." He turned to get back in the car. "Wait!" Jasper lunged for the briefcase. He was desperate. He had debts to pay. He couldn't let the money leave. The driver backhanded him. It was a casual, efficient movement. Jasper flew backward and hit the gravel hard. He scrambled backward, crab-walking away from the men. I watched from the hedges, my heart pounding. It was chaos. It was perfect. Jasper had no product, no money, and he had just assaulted a representative of a very dangerous syndicate. But then the man stopped. He looked at the house. He looked at the dark windows. "If the real one is inside," the man said to the driver, "then perhaps we should go in and find it ourselves. And find this old woman." My blood ran cold. I hadn't calculated for that. I thought they would just leave. I thought they would punish Jasper and vanish. But they were professionals. They were here for a $20 million asset. If Jasper said it was in the house, they were going to tear the house apart to find it. And they were going to find me. I reached for my phone to dial Sheriff Miller again to tell him to hurry. But before I could hit the button, blue lights exploded in the distance. Sirens wailed, cutting through the silent night. Not one siren. 3. Sheriff Miller hadn't just come himself. He had brought backup. The man in the wool coat froze. He looked at the bottom of the driveway where the police cruisers were turning in their lights flashing against the trees. He swore a short, sharp word. He threw the briefcase into the SUV and jumped in. The driver dove behind the wheel. The SUV roared into reverse tires, spinning in the gravel, sending a spray of stones over Jasper, who was still lying on the ground. The SUV tore down the driveway, swerving around the incoming police cars and disappearing into the night. Jasper was left alone on the gravel. He sat up dazed, bleeding from his lip. He looked at the police cars surrounding him. He looked at the white painting lying in the dirt next to him. He looked at the house. I stepped out of my car. I walked out of the shadows and stood on the edge of the driveway. Jasper saw me. His eyes went wide. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "She did it!" he screamed as the sheriff stepped out of his car with his gun drawn. "She ruined it! She ruined everything!" I stood perfectly still, my hands clasped in front of me. I looked at the ruined forgery. I looked at the stepson who had tried to sell his father's legacy for a quick buck. I didn't say a word. The white canvas spoke for me. It was a blank slate, and Jasper's future was written all over it. The flashing blue lights of the police cruisers strobed against the Victorian facade of the manor, turning the stone walls into a disorienting pulse of light and shadow. Sheriff Miller stood over Jasper, who was still sitting in the gravel, looking like a man whose entire reality had just dissolved into a white mist. "Get up, Jasper," Miller said, his voice flat. "She set me up!" Jasper shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She ruined the Morisot. That painting, look at it. It's worth $20 million, and she turned it into a whiteboard." I walked closer, my shoes crunching softly on the stones. I stopped just outside the police tape that was being strung up. "Jasper," I said, my voice calm enough to cut through his hysteria. "I told you yesterday. It was just a painting of a cow. I tried to warn you that the chemicals were unstable." "A cow?" Jasper scrambled to his feet, ignoring the deputy trying to restrain him. He lunged toward the white canvas lying in the dirt. "It was the woman in the garden. I saw the blue. I saw the signature." Sheriff Miller looked down at the canvas. The photoreactive varnish had done its work thoroughly. The image was completely obliterated by a thick, opaque milkiness. It looked like a sheet of drywall. "Looks like a mess to me, son," Miller said. "But what I'm more interested in is the gentleman in the black SUV who nearly ran over my deputy. You want to tell me who your friends were?" Jasper clamped his mouth shut. He realized, too late, that admitting he was selling a stolen masterpiece to an international crime syndicate was perhaps not the best legal defense. I was selling family property," Jasper stammered. "I have the right." "Not when the property is reported as potential evidence in a federal looting investigation," Miller said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Mrs. Voss called me. She told me about the provenance, about the Nazi records." Jasper's face went pale. "What?" "You're under arrest, Jasper," Miller said, spinning him around. "For attempted sale of stolen goods, reckless endangerment, and we'll probably tack on filing a false police report for that burglary you called in yesterday." As they marched him toward the cruiser, Jasper looked back at me one last time. The arrogance was gone. The greed was gone. All that was left was confusion. "It was real," he whispered. "I know it was real." Just looked at him and shook my head slightly. He would never know. He would spend the rest of his life wondering if he had hallucinated the blue dress, or if he had simply been outplayed by a woman he considered obsolete. They put him in the back of the car. The heavy door slammed shut with a sound of finality. Sheriff Miller walked over to me. He tipped his hat. "You okay, Helena? That was a close call with the SUV." "I'm fine, Frank," I said. "Just tired." "And the painting?" He nodded at the white square in the dirt. "Is that really the treasure?" I looked at the forgery. The drying agents would eventually crack the paint underneath, destroying it completely. The cow was gone. The fake Morisot was gone. No, I said. That was just a decoy. A little theater to flush out the rats. Miller smiled. I figured. You were always the smart one in the family. So, where is the real one? Safe, I said, and ready to go home. 3 days later, I stood in the climate-controlled intake room of the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. The air smelled familiar. Dust, ozone, and old canvas. It was the smell of my life. On the table before me sat the woman in the garden. I had removed the varnish, stabilized the paint, and framed it in a simple, museum-quality housing. She looked radiant. The blue of her dress sang under the gallery lights. The green of the garden felt alive. Standing next to me was Dr. Aris Thorne, the head of European provenance. He was looking at the painting with tears in his eyes. It's a miracle, Helena, he said softly. We've had this on the presumed destroyed list since 1946. To see her, it's like seeing a ghost come back to life. She was hiding in an attic, I said, just waiting for someone to turn on the light. I handed him the folder containing the ERR invoice, the purchase receipt from 1950, and the full history of the object. I'm donating it, I said, in Richard's name, but with the stipulation that the museum conducts a full restitution search. If there are heirs of the original Jewish owners, it belongs to them. If not, it stays here, where the public can see it, where it's safe. Of course, Aris said. We will begin the search immediately. Helena, this is worth a fortune. You know that. You could have kept it. The statute of limitations on the original theft is murky. I looked at the girl in the painting. She was looking back over her shoulder, frozen in a moment of eternal summer. She didn't belong to me. She didn't belong to Jasper. She belonged to history. I have enough, I said. I have my house, I have my quiet, and I have the knowledge that I didn't let the darkness win. I signed the deed of gift. I put down the pen. My hands, which had been shaking for days, were finally steady. I walked out of the museum and into the bright afternoon sun of the National Mall. I took a deep breath. The air was crisp and clean. Jasper was currently out on bail, but his gallery was closed. His reputation was in tatters, and the black market buyers were undoubtedly looking for him to recoup their travel expenses. He would be looking over his shoulder for the rest of his life. He had chased the price tag and lost the value. I got into a taxi and headed for the train station. I was going back to the Hudson Valley. I had a lot of work to do. There were still hundreds of boxes in the attic, thousands of objects to clean and catalog. Who knows what else was hidden in the dust? I smiled. I was retired, technically, but a curator's work is never really done. So that is my story. I would love to hear what you think. Is the value of art in the price it commands, or the history it preserves? And what would you have done with the painting? Let me know in the comments below. And if you believe in preserving the past, please subscribe to Silver Fox Legacy. Until next time.